strategic money, strategic risk. What corporate venture really wants from MedTech.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Henriksson. I am the Senior Equity Research Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, covering medical device companies. We got a great panel here to kind of start off the day. I think this panel is going to create the framework for the rest of the day as we talk about scaling innovation, as we talk about the timelines to get that out there, talking about AI, talking about the capital markets. And so this is probably the most talking I'll get during this panel, so I'll finish up there and I'll introduce our group. We have Komeil Nasrollahi, Senior Director of Innovation and Venture Partnerships at Siemens Healthineers. We have Steve Mickelsen, entrepreneur and founder of many medical device companies, including Field Medical currently. And then we have Mayank Vijayvergia, Executive of Strategy and Market Development for Cardiovascular and Interventional Solutions at GE Healthcare. Why don't we start at the beginning with the innovation itself? And so, Steve, you are founding many of these companies. You are finding an unmet need, or you're finding something to disrupt the standard of care. How do you start with that, finding what is needed for the disruption?
Well, I've been very fortunate to wear two hats for a long time. So when I started, for instance, Ferropulse, I was still in training as a fellow in cardiac electrophysiology, and so I kind of got to see the unmet need kind of from front row seat, or at least what I perceived was the need, and started the company and had a mission at that point. And so throughout the years, I've been involved in a lot of other people's startups as a consultant and those types of things, and and started a few more companies that were successful. But I think part of it is being an expert in your area. You don't have to be a doctor necessarily, but to understand that need. Now, there are plenty of ways you can understand the need without being an individual on the front lines, but it made it a little easier because I've never really invented anything that wasn't supposed to be used in the field of cardiac electrophysiology.
Interesting. So how did that kind of go in? It sounds like you discovered champagne by accident. Is that how the process worked?
Yeah. Well, I've always been creative. I like to paint. I like to write songs. I like to invent stuff. So when you ideate when you're working, and you're all, boy, this sucks. I think I could do a better job than that. So it's you go and you tinker and you figure it out. But that's the inventing part of it. From a financing part of it, that took a lot of years to figure out how to navigate financing, and help from a lot of really good people who were more experienced in it than I was. For Field, we just raised $75 million on telling the story of an unmet need, and the H-Averse, we just sold that. That's $40 million, again, telling a story on an unmet need and growth opportunities and things like that. And that narrative, kind of falls out from, I guess it's the same thing. Identifying the need and being able to tell the story are kind of hand in hand.
Yeah, and it also sounds like as a private company or a small company, you're able to be more nimble and you're able to be more aggressive in getting that $75 million. What else is there behind the scenes that allows you as a startup to be more nimble?
Well, a lot of top down. When you have a team of 3 people, you're not really moving forward by consensus, because there's too much for 3 people to do. So everyone has to make executive decisions and then bring it back to the group to get to the next milestone. Where the bigger a company gets, there's a more policy in place, more process in place, more consensus building needed, and it can really slow things down.
Interesting. And then, Komeil, let's start from your side as well, because you're on the large diversified side at Siemens Healthineers. You have hundreds of these companies to follow. How do you stay organized with being able to keep track of all of them? Because not all 100 of them are going to be able to be huge successes.
Right. So yeah, you're right. We see a lot of companies, and we have a team. in China, India, Europe, and the US. So we're covering all our major markets to see what's innovation coming to their market, who's building what. But what we learned was, it's better to focus on the problem, like what customer want, instead of just going out there and see what's out there, because there's so much is out there. There's so many good companies, so many smart people building cool stuff, but not necessarily all of them solving a problem for us or for our customer. So how we work is we work backward from the customer. So we sit down with the customer to understand, what problem they're trying to solve, what solution that they need that we don't have right now. Then we go find that a specific solution, a specific company, so we can bring it on board. That makes our job much easier.
Interesting, because it almost sounds like both you and Steve, you're finding that problem. And it sounds like, could it be that you guys are finding it in parallel and then you guys connect? You're like, oh man, we just found the same problem together. Or are you listening to what the privates are doing and that kind of helps you with your idea generation of where to go?
Sometimes. So, again, when we're talking with the startups, early stage companies, as I said, like super smart people, they're very expert in their field. So my team and I, we're always trying to be quiet, just let them talk so we can learn, we can educate ourselves in that specific field. And what we learn, we also take it to the customer. So sometimes we, kind of like soft pitch it to the customer without giving it a specific name of the company. It's like, by the way, would you be interested in this kind of, solution? This might not be on your radar, but we see it. We see more companies doing this space. Would that be interesting to you? So if there's a yes, then we can bring the company in.
Yeah, very interesting. And Mayank, I know that with you on the cardiovascular side, a lot of the new innovation and a lot of the new ideas out there is with AI. So I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, what is, those new ideas, those new unmet needs coming out there, and how do you kind of organize all that? Because there's a lot of noise around AI.
A lot of noise around AI, but I represent our segment. So from the segment side, we're split up in terms of therapeutic areas, and from there we are getting to what we call getting to Gemba and talking to customers, understanding what are their most critical needs. Whenever we hear AI, it's, hey, is this going to replace physicians? As we talk to physicians, the big thing that they say is burnout. They love what they do. They're not going to be replaced, but what they want is, how do I deal with the increasing pressures of doing more procedures, doing more with less, and that's at least where we've seen AI be adopted best.
Interesting, yeah, because it's some of these procedures can be time saving, but if you're doing more and more of them, it kind of creates that extra burden in itself. So is this something where the AI is trying to just find the right pathway for these patients to be treated better? So it then turns into, if these patients are treated better earlier on, they're able to not have to come and be re-hospitalized and have to have any follow-up procedures, or at least limit the follow-up procedures?
That's definitely a big area. I'd give when I think of where AI has value versus AI in terms of just driving more efficiency, for example. I'll take the example of FARAPULSE, right? And not AI, but I think it speaks to some of the details of the need. So FARAPULSE increased efficiency of doing EP procedures substantially, obviously much safer as well, but these are 2-hour procedures that got down to 30, 45-minute procedures, which is fantastic, safer, more efficient, and strong efficacy. But from a physician standpoint, what we saw over the year was that before they were doing 2, 3 procedures, now they're doing 5 or 6 procedures. So that value proposition was very compelling, but when you talk to the physician, there was a lot of burnout. The CFOs of the hospital had they had dollar signs on the EP lab, and they wanted to see increased utilization. It was focused on optimizing, and burnout was a big issue then. And so when I think of AI, it's not just, hey, driving efficiency or driving more throughput. It's how are we making the lives of of healthcare practitioners better, and making it so that they're not just efficient, but also able to do high quality, have high quality as well.
Okay, so it sounds like there's always a learning adjustment with all these new technologies coming out on the market, and it sounds like AI can be able to help organize all that together in the future. And so, FARAPULSE is a very interesting one, got acquired by Boston Scientific. Steve, the interesting thing, though, is that you sold FARAPULSE and now you're developing a new technology with Field Medical. It also sounds like you developed this FARAPULSE product. You saw how it replaced disrupted the market as the standard of care, and then you're seeing what challenges remain. Is that kind of the thought process of a serial entrepreneur?
Yeah. Well, so the FARAPULSE, when I started working on it, we called it, I was at the University of Iowa at the time, so we called the company initially Iowa Approach, and then we changed the name in 2014. I ran it for about 3.5 years. I hired an experienced executive to take the CEO and move the company forward. But what happened is, even though I was a practicing EP, the first time I ever got to use it is after it got approved, because I couldn't participate in the clinical trial. And by the time I actually used it, I'd been working in PFA and trying to optimize it, understand all the areas where I made this FARAPULSE was a very raw technology. It was kind of missing the point, and I realized that, boy, everyone who was a fast follower is doing what I did 10 years ago. So I saw an opportunity to do something a lot more challenging, more difficult, focal catheter for deadly arrhythmias in the ventricle rather than nuisance problems like AFib. Everyone has a good AFib solution now. And so I was going after the more difficult stuff. And I thought it would be fun to do a second generation technology. This will be my last one, I'm sure.
Well, we'll see about that.
Yeah.
And then, Komeil, you take these products, we talked about FARAPULSE and Boston Scientific. Siemens Healthineers has had a bunch of acquisitions. And let's start first with the due diligence, because there's the balance for these companies to share as much as they can to you, but also they want to make sure that they keep business models somewhat secret. Right. So how do you balance that level of transparency in your due diligence? Because you have to make sure you know everything, but given their agency, they're not going to give you all that.
Right. So what we always look at, it's kind of as like a filter, right? To see, who's the right fit for us. We see if they have any customer traction, right? Is anybody using their solution? Because we are not the end user in most cases, right? The clinician, the hospitals, they're the user. So we want to see who's using it, even on the co-pilot, even there's no, even as a side project. Tell us who's using it, because there's a good chance we know them because we work with all the hospitals, right? Then we can ask them, give us your feedback. Without asking any secret sauce, without asking about technology, you are the user, you tell us, give us a review of what you're using. So that's always the most important thing for us, that there's a hospital, a clinician, a doctor, somebody's using it, and they have a positive feeling about it.
So if it's commercial, do you guys ever evaluate kind of pre-commercial stuff? I think that's where maybe more the IP or keeping your plans close to your chest as you're growing a company from that pre-commercial to commercial. Growth stage companies, most of it's going to be public. You can buy it. You can look at it.
Yeah.
I'd add one thing. When I think of adoption, it's not just the immediate clinical adoption or utilization, it's also the behavior changes that are associated with it. Like take FARAPULSE, for example. It got acquired pre-revenue, just got CE marked, but the behaviors it was going to change and some of the early traction during the clinical trials was very strong, those behavior changes. So I think at least in early diligence, when I think adoption, it's not just the clinical utilization, it's how are you thinking through how this is going to change or be a part of an existing workflow.
Just adding to that, yeah, you're 100% right on the integration, right? Because we don't want to create another level of complexity for the physician, for the nurses, whoever is using that, right? Because the last thing they need, add one more layer of complexity, and they're not going to use it. Period.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's very interesting that we just talked about the broad spectrum of where these private companies can go from either pre-commercial to a path of revenue generation, revenue ramp up. Even if you have to get to the IPO, you have to show at least a path to profitability. So Komeil, though, when you get to that and you like this company and it's on a wide range of the spectrum, if it's pre-commercial, if it's kind of getting closer to that revenue ramp level of profitability, does that change how you go about financing the deal? How do you go about, being able to interact with these companies in a kind of as a partnership or as a full investment into the company?
So what works for us, so we do a lot of acquisition, we do a lot of M&A, but M&A has its own risks too, so it could be very risky and very expensive as well. So what we learned, through a lot of experience, what works for us is we call it venture clienting. So basically getting to know the company, getting to know the technology without right away acquiring them. So we onboard them as a supplier. We offer that solution. We put it a contract framework. We offer it to our customers and run with it for a year or two. See, what is the end user thinks about this. See what the feedback they give us. And if everything goes well, then we can talk about acquisition. We can acquire them. And we just did one of the recent example was a company based in Israel. They had a very good software for surgical navigation. That something was missing in our portfolio. Our customer keep asking us, do you have something like this? And we didn't have it. So we did a full scouting in the market. We came across a couple of good companies. And these guys were a small company, very good solution. We did a test run at our headquarters. Our team liked it. Then we signed a contract with them as a kind of venture clienting contract. Onboard them, we deployed them in 8 customer sites across the world, and we asked our customer, please use this and give us the feedback. And everybody loved it. So after 2 years, our CEO for that business unit decided, said, guys, I want to buy this. So we just bought them. We just closed the deal in December.
Very nice. So does that help with the integration? Does it make a more seamless integration versus maybe acquiring a publicly traded company?
100%, because you have to because you get to know them. Like in this case, we know this guy for 2 years. We know everybody in the team. We know that how they think. We know how they operate. They get to know us too, because it's a very different world. We are a massive company, like 77,000 employees. We are operating in 180 countries. We have so many levels of management. So yes, that step by step onboarding always works.
And maybe there's a lot of obviously similarities between Siemens and GE Healthcare in this respect. Is early partnership is important. One, it gives us the opportunity together to really start learning and validating, but also it helps with that integration piece because most likely a lot of these technologies would be integrating onto our capital. Very
interesting. And then Steve, just from your perspective with that partnership and everything, how does that help you with, as you were building out your companies to be able to see, okay, this is what they're looking for. Let me make sure I'm, steering the cart that way.
Well, the diligence question kind of comes up there again. Obviously, if you've gone through a process before, you kind of understand that there is a number of check boxes that people are going to be looking for. You're going to get a big stack of paper, and there's going to be a million questions, and you're going to want to be prepared to answer those questions. And so that's for financing. So the level of diligence early on, seed stage, doesn't usually cost you too much time. When you get into strategic option deals, then there's a lot of diligence. You don't have to give up all the secrets. It's just usually it's a transaction. But if it's an acquisition, then the diligence gets quite deep. And preparing for that is kind of critical. You always have 10 plans when you're building a company, go to market, sell it soon, either way. But you're always thinking about preparing the body of work, your IP, your supply chains, your contractors, and they're talking about an interesting phase when you finally sell the company and you get an integration team. When you're working with really complex medical stuff, there are a lot of simple medical tools out there that are easy to integrate into a catalog. But a lot of the stuff, especially if you have imaging equipment and things like that, getting it integrated into the system so it's seamless to the customer, there's some real process involved there.
That's interesting. Yeah, you're talking about more of the complex cases. Kind of, what do you think is kind of the percentage of boilerplate check the box versus this is a different, we have to use a different approach because it's a different procedure, a different technology? Like, is it 80-20? Is it something different?
I think that's technology dependent. So if you're a fast follower and you have reimbursement and all that stuff is there. Usually you'll have one or two things that are kind of holding up, that are creating all the questions about your company. Like it's, your supply chain is a problem, or your manufacturer can't scale, or there's going to be something, and then you're going to have to address that and build on it for a while. Or an IP in our space is obviously something that you do a deep dive on. But I would say more like 95% of the stuff is check boxes, and where you're going to spend all your time in your lawyer bills or whatever you got to do to fix it. That's going to be, depending on what the technology is. We just sold, Traverse, and that's a transseptal crossing wire, guide wire. It's a competitor for Boston Scientific's Baylis VersaCross. And as a competitor to that, basically we knew, and as a doctor, I used to just do, Bobby on a standard guide wire, which is off-label. But we wanted something that was an improvement there. And when we're in that diligence, J&J was, very focused on scalability, and that took us a while to solve those problems.
Interesting. So it almost sounds like you heard what J&J was looking for, and part of your product development was to address that need.
Yeah. I mean, as a small startup, you're not going to be addressing huge scales. If I could sell, 5 million in a year, I think that would look like a good trajectory. But they wanted, they have an install base that is orders of magnitude more than that.
Yeah, but did they come to you and they were saying, "Hey, we're looking for this kind of new technology. You want to go at it?" Or were you at a dinner and they kind of were talking about it after a few drinks and like, "Oh man, we need to get this scaled up more. We need to find something that can do this." And you're like, "Okay, let me see what I can do."
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think that's a problem that a lot of people have. If a big company that has a huge commercial operation and works in many countries, they have to think about how to get it into each of those countries and stuff like that. But you're going to manufacture it and make it available. I think it was a natural question, but it was the first one that I ever had to really address. Where we spent a lot of time on it, because our plans were very different as a startup than the plans. Like, well, that's your problem, but you got to address those.
Yeah, very interesting. And then Komeil, I'll start with you, and then I'll move on to you, Mayank. But the integration side, so you already have made the announcement about the investment into the company. That integration side, how much of that is an art versus a science, similar to actually the check boxes that we're talking about of getting the product developed and sold?
So you need both of them, right? You need the science, but what we learn, like science get you to day one, artists get you to the year 3. Right? So what is the science? Like the contracting, the consolidation, the compensation, the organizational charts, right? So you have to have those as a baseline. So you have to make sure, they're all aware of it. They all, they know how we work, we know how they work. So you need the science, but the art is when, the culture, right? And I can give you an example. We acquired Varian, and Varian by itself, it was not a startup, but it was a big company. We acquired them for $16 billion a couple of years ago. And we knew them very well, but Varian is a California-based company. So the mentality, the way they think, we call it in the company, is like a cowboy mentality. We are a German, right? We're a German company based in Munich, so we are very process-oriented, all engineers thinking, everything is has to be step by step, right? So we were not sure in the beginning, and all the paperwork, all the science was good, right? But the art, that culture, it was a little bit challenging for us because they were in a different mindset that we were, right? So what we try to do, again, communicate. You cannot communicate enough. It's like over communication. You have to keep telling them, what's the next step, what we're trying to do, so they understand our process. Also, what we did was, we exchange manager. So we put some of our senior executive in Varian, we brought some of the Varian executive in the Siemens side. So they could also be kind of the ambassador, right? So they're not just hearing from the headquarters, this is what the way to do it, right? And that helps. That helps a lot.
It's very interesting, that exchange process that takes place. And then, Mayank, with the market development side, once these companies are integrated, how does that process of being able to get that kind of market development side of the story started?
So from the business segment, there's obviously the integration of the technologies, the people, but then once that's all leveled out, then, okay, what does market development look like? How are we kind of building some of the synergies of, hey, this is the call point where you guys have, or the startup has fantastic KOLs in specific areas that we want to grow in. Let's make sure that we're building kind of towards that with some of our other products. That's kind of how I would think about the market development piece of it, post-integration.
That's very interesting. And then, as we're kind of rounding up here, I'm curious how the trends of innovation, of the due diligence to find these companies, the investments in them, and then the integration, how has that changed in 2026 over the last few years? I know from the public side, there's been a huge sector rotation out of the publicly traded companies. But I'm curious on the private side, if you're seeing any similar trends going on, anything from 2026 versus kind of the last few years before.
There is, so when we talked a bit about diligence, there's clinical, there's technical, and commercial de-risking that needs to happen. I'd say more and more commercial de-risking is becoming front and center, more so than in the past. So you're going to be seeing a bit later stage acquisitions. It was true with Traverse, right? The ability to scale was the key kind of metric or de-risking that was needed, and I think you're going to continue to see that.
Yeah, I think most startups in the medical device space historically were always acquired after they got CE mark, FDA, or something like that, where they showed some market traction. That is the highest level of de-risking, where, if you have a P&L where, you're actually profitable and you showing year-over-year growth, that's a lot easier to sell to your shareholders in an acquisition. In some of the spaces, though, they are taking bigger risks. EP is one of them, of course. There's been a series of pre-revenue acquisitions that are in the $300 billion range, or even multi-billions. And so it's possible, but those are just risky, and so you're placing bets. I bet the place where this is a question for you guys, where, strategic money in a startup is really helpful, tends to be less dilutive, comes with its own set of challenges, which is usually exclusivity or some other issue. But in those cases, you're not waiting for that full commercial readiness. That's where you're making your bets. So when you're out there investing, what level of a company do you feel most comfortable, putting some capital into it?
So we don't do minority investment, period. This is not Siemens, it's just, again, German company, the culture is, if you want to invest, I want to control. Right? So minority investment does not give us that control that we like, so we don't feel comfortable and we feel like it's too risky, it's out of our control, right? So we don't do that. Very simple. We have some cases here and there, but that's not something we do on the routine side. We see, we acquired companies, as I said, we acquired a lot of companies, but we also de-risking those more on the, that venture clienting path. That let's get in the partnership, let's really try it. Then we get a feeling about it, see the customer get excited. Then we also, in the meantime, we think about the commercialization, how we could deploy it, which market, which region, which go first. So again, de-risking it for ourselves. Because by nature, we are not VC. And that's something I always tell the companies. Like, if you just want money, don't come to us. Like, there's so many good VC out there, they can write check for you. We don't have that appetite for the risk.
That's very interesting. I think we can close out there. I think the key takeaways was when you find the unmet need that both the doctors, the hospitals, and the patients need. Nowadays, we're now looking at how to get those products developed so it can be at a point of commercialization or de-risking. And then also this with the integration, you want to work with someone that is going to be a partnership, not just an investment. And so I want to thank all three of you guys for joining. I thought it was a very fascinating conversation. And thank you everyone for listening in.